All right, I'm going to get started right away because I want to do a review of the stupid lesson. That was a bad day. You know, we've had good days and bad days of distance learning, but when I was getting kicked off for no really good reason, and then I redid a whole wonderful video and then the audio didn't record, no idea why. I hope you can hear the audio now. In fact, I don't even know how to test it. I do know how to test it, actually. I can go on my phone and make sure. Where is my phone? I've lost my phone. Test. All right, it's working. Here's the delayed version. Oh, it's the Matrix. Look at the Matrix. Okay, that's really annoying. All right, well, at least I know the sound's working, and then I can post this video after. Okay, so today is a very important day because we're going to be talking mainly about one man, and that is Martin Luther. I also want to go over a little bit of the other guys, just really quickly. If you go back to Google Classroom, you'll see those names that I had there. They were John Wycliffe, Catherine of Siena, Jan Hus, Desiderius Erasmus. And just really quickly, the main thing you need to know about those guys is that they lay the foundation for Martin Luther. Those guys are starting to say some things that nobody had ever said before. The big one is Wycliffe and Hus. They want the Bible to be translated into the native language. So if you're in England, to be in English. If you're in France, to be French. If the church didn't like this, because they didn't really want everybody to read the Bible. They wanted people to listen to priests talk about the Bible. So they wanted to try to keep everything in Latin. But for a lot of people, that didn't make sense. And so Wycliffe and Hus, they translate it to their native languages. And this got people to actually read the Bible for themselves. That's going to be a huge thing going forward. The other person in there was Catherine of Siena, and she actually was not trying to reform the church in any way. In fact, she was 100% into the church. She was actually considered to be a saint by the Catholic Church, which is extremely hard to do. You have to perform miracles and prove that you can basically have a connection to God to become a saint. And she did. She became a saint. Now, what she did do, however, for others is that people looked at her and realized that she didn't need the church at all. She was spiritual. She had a connection to God. And the church was like a means of a distraction almost for her, that she didn't need to go to Mass and then to God, right? That little triangle. She could go directly to God herself. There was no problem. And this really opens up to people saying, wait a minute, what is really the purpose of the church? Because remember, the church is getting very wealthy and a little bit corrupt too. The Great Schism, having two popes, the indulgences, people buying their positions. Like, the church really wasn't winning over a lot of fans at this point. And people are starting to realize that maybe you didn't need the church after all. That's going to be a huge thing for Martin Luther as we get into him. And then finally, Erasmus, that last guy, he lays the foundation. He basically is saying, you know, the connection to God can be a personal one. And he, again, wants the Bible to be translated into the native language. So all of that was basically what I've asked you to do in the lessons that I have that didn't work last time. Today, we're going to go about talking of Martin Luther, and he's the big guy, the poster child, right? So if they were to make a movie and they were to call it The Reformation, it would have Martin Luther on the cover. He would be the star. And that's who we're talking about today, okay? And yes, Martin Luther King Jr. is named after this man, not the other way around. So we're talking Martin Luther today. Okay, now he actually starts his life out normally, and not in the religious world. He is studying to become a lawyer. And one day he actually gets into this horrific storm and he thinks he's going to die. And what he says is, if I survive, like you've seen this in movie life, if I live, I promise I'll never smoke or I'll never eat junk food or whatever. People always make promises to God when they're about to die. Martin Luther does that, and he says, if I survive, I will become a monk, which is, basically a priest. A priest really is talking to the people. A monk is almost like an inner spiritual thing where you serve God for, you don't really, you go around and help others, but you're not preaching like a priest does. So we've talked about a monk before. And he does that. He survives the storm, and then he becomes a monk. Being a monk, he is very devout, okay? So if you're a devout, and I've used this word, and just so you can see it, devout basically means very faithful. And by the way, Martin Luther will be on the test in a lot of detail, and I'll write down the stuff that I think you should really, really know. But he was a devout. He was very, very faithful to his Catholic Church. He didn't want to change anything at this point. What happens, though, is the Bible again. He, once he becomes this priest and this monk, he starts to read the Bible, and he realizes that the Bible has a lot of information in there that we should be following first and foremost. At this point, the church has a lot of things that they add and say, well, we're the church, so we know best. And many of those things are not 100% in the Bible. Some will argue that they're in there and you have to interpret it. But to Luther, the one thing that he wanted more than anything is to follow the Bible. The Bible is the highest source of authority. Okay, it's not the Pope, it's not your local priest. He wants to follow the Bible all the way through. That's the only thing that you really need is the Bible. And so what he wants to do then is to translate the Bible to everyone else, right? That makes sense. So he says, here's this, I'm looking up the quote right now. He says this he uses one word that's going to become very popular, and it's faith. Okay. So he says that the Bible is the number one thing that you need to follow. And here's the quote. He says, faith alone and the efficacious or the effective use of the word of God brings salvation. Okay. So faith alone, this is the big thing. So if you remember one quote from Luther, it's faith alone. Notice it's not faith plus the church plus, giving to the poor. That gets you into heaven. It's faith, and faith alone is all you need. All right. This is going to be huge. So before we get to how people react, let's go with how Luther delivers this message to the world, because he does it in a pretty dramatic way that I think is pretty darn interesting. Okay, so as he is looking over and being a monk, there is a Pope Leo. We don't need to know the name, but he wants to finish his big cathedral, St. Peter's Cathedral, which I believe is in England, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to double check that later, but I think it's in England. And he needed money. Okay, well, the number one way to get money at this time is to sell the indulgences. Okay, and I've used this term many times, and maybe you haven't seen the other ones, But indulgences, that's where you buy your way into heaven. You give some money to the church, and the church says, "Vam, vam, I don't know, ta-da, kaboom, abracadabra," and your sins go away. Luther sees this. He sees what's happening. The Pope wants money, so he goes and gets money from people in exchange for their salvation. This doesn't really make sense to Luther, nor should it to pretty much any Christian now that the reform has happened, right? This doesn't really make sense. If you're rich, you shouldn't buy your way into heaven. That's not how God works. It's not in the Bible. There's none of that. There's no such thing as an indulgence in the Bible. It's not like Jesus said, here are the 3 ways you can get into heaven. Be really, really good and follow me. Oh, and then if you have a lot of money, you can buy your way in, right? Jesus never says that. So Luther realizes this and says, that's not right. We need to change some things. In fact, the church itself has become too powerful and people are relying on the church and they're missing the main message, which is faith. You need to have faith in God. And he has one very big difference between the Catholic Church and his new his understanding. And it's all about salvation. Everybody wanted to know how to get into heaven. Okay, so salvation means to get into heaven, right? According to the Catholic Church at this time, you had to earn your way into heaven, which was the sacraments, belonging to the church, being good. Bible is on this list too, I guess, follow the Bible. But there's a lot of different steps, right? And even when I put it in this method, right, the sacraments, it's not like, oh, remember there were 7 sacraments. So you had 7 things to do and you couldn't even do all of them. Remember, you can't be a priest and also be married. So you can't do all of them, but you do 6 of these, plus you have to belong to the Catholic Church. You have to be a good person and follow the Bible. So there's a lot of different steps. This is the Catholic way. Okay, and then Luther. He says that salvation is not earned. It is rather a gift from God. Okay, like look at this. This is starting to be very complicated on this side. And this side is very simple. It's a gift. It's all you need is a gift from God. Now, it's one thing to have a gift, right? I can get a gift of my PlayStation 4 from my mom or whatever for Christmas. If I don't believe in that gift, if I don't open that gift, if I don't put that gift into good use, the PlayStation 4 sits there and nothing happens, right? If I believe in the gift, I understand that it is mine, I practice, I have a PlayStation 4, boom, I'm good to go. It's the same thing when it comes to salvation. Luther is saying that it's a gift from God. Everybody's given it. It doesn't matter who you are. You have it. All you have to do is believe that you have it. And if you do that and you believe 100%, not 50%, not 70%, not 80%, you do have to believe in it 100%, that you will do the things you need to do in order to be accepted into heaven. It's a faith alone. Okay. So people are going to be excited about this, but how does he actually give this to the people, right? He thinks this for himself. How does he go about? Well, he does a very, very famous thing with a little bit of drama, to be honest with you. Okay. He writes down 95 ideas. Okay. And what will become known as the 95 Theses. Okay. He writes down 95 things that he sees as incorrect or wrong or need to be changed with the church. But that's not the dramatic part. The dramatic part is that he goes to his local church at the time, which I think it's in our textbook, if I remember correctly. Yeah, in the town of Wittenberg. I got to learn how to spell. This is real. It really is one of the more famous things to ever happen on this planet, to be honest with you, in terms of, at least in Europe. Okay. So he goes to his local church in the city that he's at the time. And remember, it's German, so we don't pronounce it Wittenberg. We would be with a V. So Wittenberg is how we pronounce it. So Wittenberg, he goes there and he nails up 95 theses, his 95 ideas that he had, and he literally nails them onto the door of the church. Okay, so pretty dramatic, right? That's pretty darn dramatic. And people will obviously see that, and it makes a big, big impression. Okay, so you need to know that he wrote these 95 theses, and you need to know that he nailed them up on his church door. And the biggest thing, you can go and still read these 95 theses. In fact, if we had more time, which we do not, I'm already a little bit behind of where I wanted to be. We would go over some of those theses because they are interesting. If you want, you can perform a little extra credit and look up some of those and, find maybe the 5 most interesting to you if you want, and I can give you some extra credit. But unfortunately, we don't have time. But the big theme is that you don't need to earn your way into heaven. You are already in heaven. You're given that gift as long as you believe in it. If you believe in it and you follow what your heart tells you after you've believed in it 100%, you're good to go. Okay? Now, so let's go back to the main theme of the last lecture, which you didn't really get, but it was that people were starting to read the Bible on their own in their own language. So more people are going to read the Bible. When that happens, okay, you have basically 2 ideas here. Okay, you have the Catholic Church on one hand that's giving you a bunch of complicated reasons or ideas on how to get into heaven, right? You're not guaranteed. You have to do all of these things. And even when you do all these things, there's no like light bulb that goes on that says, yep, you did it. You have to kind of just hope that you get in. And there's a lot of different things. Some of those things are in the Bible. Some of those things, like indulgences, are not in the Bible. What, according to Luther, the 2 things that are in the Bible I make sure I'm spelling correctly. All right, my spelling skills are not very good. Where is it? Yeah, Eucharist. I spelled it right. Good job. Okay, so there's 2 things that are actually in the Bible, and that is baptism and Eucharist. Okay, so the things we're missing in terms of the Catholic sacraments, right? Where we don't have marriage. It's not, marriage isn't part of getting into heaven. Becoming a priest isn't going into heaven. Confessing your sins is not a way to get into heaven. Confirmation is not a way to get into heaven. And I said confession. Oh, and the deathbed. When you're on your deathbed, you don't have to have your last rites. So the only 2 things you need are baptism and Eucharist. Now, baptism, and many of you are probably familiar with it this way, doesn't necessarily need to happen when you're a baby. Okay, it isn't about clean. The Catholics do that so that if you die prematurely, you still get into heaven, even if you're a baby, right? So you want to be baptized pretty quickly. Since everybody's going to heaven, getting baptized at a young age is not necessary, according to Luther. You can do that anytime. So adults could be baptized and stuff like that. And then the Eucharist is still important too, the body of Christ. Although there are some differences with Catholic and Luther, but that is also according to him in the Bible and things you need to do. So basically, the basic sense is, do you want a very long and complicated way to get into heaven? Or do you want Luther's believe in God and you'll be good way? When people are starting to read the Bible for themselves, they're going to make that decision. And believe it or not everybody wants one or the other. Like I showed you, I don't know if it came through, but what I was saying is that, in fact, I should go over this again because it's very important, right? Everybody doesn't pick one or the other. It's not like, oh my God, everybody's going to go here because it's easier or because it's better. And not everybody's going to go to the Catholic Church because Luther is this madman nailing up things onto a church wall. What they're going to do is basically go 50-50. So as of last count, there are 2.3. This is today, not back then, but you'll get the idea. Okay. There are 2.3 billion Christians in the world right now. Okay. Maybe even, I think 2.2, 2.3 or 2.4, but it is over 2 billion Christians. Of those 2 billion, and again, this is today, this is 2020. Okay, so of those 2.3 billion Christians that exist in the world today, 1.2 of them are Catholic Christians. Remember, Catholics are still Christian. You have to understand that. And then that means that the remaining 1.1 are non-Catholic Christians. Okay? So it's as simple as that, really. I mean, I'll go over a little bit more detail, but so we got basically 2.3 billion people that believe Jesus Christ is the Savior, Christian. Of those, 1.2 billion are Catholic, and all the other types of Christians put together make up the other 1.1 billion. All right, that's a lot of people. And so of the 1.1 non-Catholic Christians, they're not all the same either. That's going to be some Protestants, which would be what Luther is. There's going to be Calvinists, as we're going to go over. There's a bunch. There's a whole, but all other, other. So the main one is Protestant, as we'll see. And there's even different types of being Protestant. Calvinism, and then there's even other types. There's about, it's hard to say because some will consider others not to be Christian and stuff like that. There's around 200, 250 different types of Christianity, including Catholic. So many of those people are not picking one or the other. They're half are going to this way and half are kind of leaving the church. And that's what Luther did. Okay, he's the big rock star, right? Without him, the Reformation probably isn't nearly as big, but people really do follow Luther and believe in his message, faith alone. Okay, and when you have somebody like that, other people are going to build off of him instead of the Catholic Church. So people here are trying to reform the Catholic Church. People that follow Luther but don't quite agree with 100%, and they start to try to reform the Luther part. That's when we have the different branches of Christianity, right? So if it starts out here, right, we'll start off here. Here's the original. We start off Catholic. Then you can go to Luther. That's going to branch off to like Calvin, as we'll talk about in a second. It's going to branch off to, who are some of our other ones we're going to go over? We have all the English things. So like the evangelicists. So basically you'll see, right? So start out Catholic. Once you have that first branch that kind of goes and tries to change a lot of the things, people will start to change stuff from Luther. And then you'll get even further away from what it is to be Catholic. And so that's what ends up happening for the next couple of hundred years to today, where we have 200 different types of Christianity, although they're all considered Christian. It's a little complicated, I know, but we all have Luther to thank for that. And so in the end, what Luther does is he creates his own church. He says Catholic Church had the right ideas, it just executed them wrong. Here is really what you need to do. And we call it being Lutheran or Lutheranism. Okay, so he starts his own church, which means it's a different sect right? The word sect, or another word that perhaps you are not familiar with is a denomination. Okay, and so a denomination is basically a different type. Okay, so I've used the word sect. You can also use the word denomination. So a denomination is basically one group of Christianity, and there are 250 different types or different denominations of Christianity. And Lutheranism is really one of the first to exist. And after that, we'll have a lot more that start to pop up. Okay. Basically, what ends up happening in Germany, then after he creates his own church, you're going to have some war between Lutherans. Oops. Okay, the Catholics aren't just going to be like, you know what, Luther, you're absolutely right. Why don't you take half of our followers into your church, right? They're going to try to fight back. And so we actually do have some violence. And it's really a shame because the people that suffer are the peasants. A lot of peasants are killed through this, especially those that reject Luther in Germany are going to be killed. And then if you get out of Germany, if you're rejecting the Catholic Church, and you will be killed. So all depending on where you are and what religion you're following, you could be killed. And, we're not talking hundreds. We're talking tens of thousands of people are killed because they're not following one or the other, which, again, not very Christian, no matter which one you're following. So, yeah, you have some violence going out as well. But basically, what ends up happening is that if the Lutherans create basically the different type of Christianity, which today is known as Protestant or Protestantism. Okay, and you can see why we call that really, it's the word protest is right there. It was Luther protesting the things about the church and why it's earned the name Protestantism. So after that, we're going to have a bunch of other people that are going to start their own denominations of Christianity. I want to fly through this part of it because Luther is clearly the most influential, but there's some other ones that I want to go over as well. In your book, it goes over a guy named Huldrych Zwingli, which is a Swiss guy that kind of does the same sort of thing, saying that, the Catholic Church worships relics and saints and non-Jesus people too much and tries to change that. Don't need to worry about him too much. I'm not going to put him on the test, I don't think, but I will put John Calvin in it because Calvin's an interesting fellow. Okay, so he is actually a French guy, and he's going to start to continue this Reformation. And what he really believes is the grace of God. That's the big thing. That's what saves you. It's very similar to Lutherans' idea of faith, but it's a bigger emphasis on the idea that it's God's grace. And so instead of everybody being given that, Calvin kind of says, some people are selected and some people are not selected. And it's God's choice. You have no say in the matter. You're either chosen or you're not. And it's God's grace if you're chosen. So it's a little bit more dire, at least in my opinion, than Luther, meaning that, if you are not saved, you're not chosen by God, there's nothing you can do. But if you truly believe in this idea, it is kind of foolproof, if you will. If God has chosen you to get into heaven, that means you are doing the things you need to do to get into heaven. You don't have to worry. It's not like God chooses you, you know you've been chosen, and then you go and do all these crazy things on earth like kill people and steal, right? Since you were chosen by God, you won't do those things, and that's why you're going to heaven. If you are on earth and you're doing those things, you're stealing, you're killing, you're hurting others, that means God has not chosen you, and that's why you are acting the way you are and why you're not going to go up to heaven. So it's actually not as dark as it might feel right off the bat. Many people think, oh my God, what kind of God would choose people right off the bat and not even give them a chance? It doesn't quite work like that for Calvin. It's more those that are chosen do the right things, and that's why they're doing the right things. And those that aren't chosen are doing bad things, and that's why. So it's a gift. So he creates Calvinism or Calvinist train of thought. Okay, and let's go ahead. The other two, we'll get to King Henry. I think King Henry is interesting enough. Well, let's talk about him now because we kind of it goes to England. So really quickly, I know this is a longer one, but this is all interesting stuff. Okay, so King Henry VIII. I forgot one mark there. Okay, King Henry VIII is an English king, and he wants to have a male child. This is a very simplified version of this, but he wants to have a male. He wants to have a son to take over for his throne. His wife gives him a son who dies very quickly, I think 1 or 2 years. And then after that, every child afterwards is a girl. King Henry is not a fan of this. So what he wants to do is get rid of his wife and get another wife, in the idea that that wife will supply a son, even though we know today, scientifically, the male is responsible for the sex of the baby, not the mother. King Henry didn't quite know this at the time. So what he wants is the D word, a divorce. He wants to divorce his first wife, his wife. Now, the problem is divorce does not exist in the Catholic Church. You cannot be divorced. Once you are married, you cannot get a divorce. All right? You can't go to your lawyers and say, I don't like this person, I want to get a divorce. The only thing you can get is an annulment, which is very complicated to get, basically meaning that for some reason you were married by mistake in the first place, and you have to have evidence to do that. Unfortunately for King Henry, having many children and living a life like that was no grounds for an annulment. So he wanted a divorce. He wanted to get rid of his first wife, get another wife. And so to do that, morally speaking, you would divorce the wife like you would today, right? You would divorce that wife and get another wife. But the church says, no, you can't do that. It doesn't, even if you're king, you can't do that. King Henry is not happy about this. And basically he says, well, then forget it. I don't want to be part of the church. I'm going to divorce my wife anyway. And I'm going to get another wife that will give me some sons. And so as the simple thing as that is, what basically ends up happening is that Henry closes down the Catholic Church pretty much in England at the time. And we're in about 1534 this time. Okay, and basically what he does is replace Catholic churches in England with his own version of the Catholic Church, which becomes known as the Church of England. Very fun name, right? Okay, so basically what he does is he replaces the Catholic Church in England with his own church, which is basically a form of Protestantism, allowing some things that the Catholic Church didn't allow and believing it in terms of faith. And so at that point, England doesn't really have a Catholic presence, and there will be some violence as well. But I mean, the king, whatever the king says, the king gets. And at this point, he wanted to change his country. So instead of England being Catholic, which it was until that point, King Henry was Catholic himself until that point. They now are basically considered Protestants, and what they will call the Church of England, or even known as the Anglican Church. So there you go. He's another important person we need to know. There's another one here at our book. It's William Tyndale. He's going to do some of the old things that the other guys were doing. You don't need to know too much. I don't think I'm going to put him on no, I don't think I will. But for fun facts, if you have a Bible at home and it says the King James Version, you have him to thank. He's the guy that really goes about to translate books from the Bible, and he does that into English, and instead of translating it directly, like word for word, he kind of translates it so that it becomes a little bit more beautiful, which some people think that he changed some of the meaning of it. Others think that it is it's perfect for the English language. So it depends on again, this is where we get so complicated, right? And why I don't like to share my views on religion with you guys. I try to give you all the views so you can make a decision, because now, because of this, the Reformation, you have so many different choices of religion, even if you want to be Christian, right? So if you want to wake up tomorrow, I want to be a Christian. Well, what does that mean? There's hundreds of different ones out there. So you have to follow what you think is right and what you believe in. So yeah, so he's responsible for the King James Version. All right, so that's going to finish up chapter 31 today. Am I still on? I am. I didn't get kicked off. Yeah. I know it's a very long lesson today. I'm sorry, guys. What I'll do is I'll make tomorrow pretty easy. So if you want I'll put that on Google Classroom too. That it's a longer lecture, I know, but I had to get over Martin Luther. He's huge, and the people that come after him are also very important. But we're basically done with our unit. We do have one last chapter. It's chapter 32 in our textbook, which basically goes the effects of the Reformation. And that chapter is going to focus again back on what the Catholic Church does to change so that it can keep up. Because if Catholic Church stayed the same and everybody was leaving, they would, fall apart. But to be fair, the Catholic Church does some great changes to itself and kind of pulls itself back up after it got knocked down, and will still remain very, very powerful even to this day. Like I showed you, 50% of the world of Christians are Catholic. So they obviously didn't disappear. They still have, 1.2 billion people following them. So the Reformation, then we'll go over some of the changes and the effects of, do you go with the Catholic Church or do you go with a reformed version of another type of Christianity, and the effects of that? We should fly through that. I think on Friday, I'll probably try to get that done. I think Friday we'll get that done. Monday, we'll go over some study guides. So Monday, Tuesday will be study guide day. And then on Wednesday, we'll do the test. Okay. So Wednesday, we'll have our final exam. And then we're going to move on to our last unit, which is the Mayans and the Aztecs and the Incas. And that will take us a couple weeks to finish. And that'll be the end of our history class. So that's it, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. I'm going to post this up, and we'll get ready for our test next Wednesday. All right. Stay safe, everyone.